me just doesn't make any sense. That's denser than a lot of urban neighborhoods. Okay, so we've got that concern. Then they go on to say it allows extraordinary clustering. Well, that's pretty scary right there, extraordinary clustering, to achieve minimum densities. What they mean by minimum densities, according to this, is 4 units per acre. So if that's their minimum density, at least it's better than 8 units per acre, but it's still a 10,000 square foot lot, is what they're saying. This is supposed to be low density housing. It says they may allow townhouses and small apartments. Zoning densities are to be determined by unique characteristics. And I'm assuming that what that means is that not all of your hypothetical 10-acre piece can be built on at all. Some of it might be a stream bed, it might be wetland, it might be cliff, whatever. And so what we're doing here is we're trying to figure out a way to put 10 acres worth of housing onto less than 10 acres. In other words, not just dividing it out. 8 units of housing on less than an acre. Then it goes on to say at the end here that clustered developments are to provide future urbanization where urban utilities are not readily available. And to tell the truth, I don't know what that means. I have no idea what they're trying to talk about there. But it does sound, to those of us who are slightly paranoid about this type of thing, that what they're saying is we're going to open up the door with these clusters so that urban development can move in as it needs to. Okay, so my concerns on these things, first of all, is how 8 units per acre could be considered low density. We've talked about that. In a lot of areas where I've lived in the past, Kitsap County, a typical low density area zoning is 1 unit for 2.5 acres. That would be the maximum allowed. And that would go down from there. So your 10-acre piece, the hypothetical example we're using, you'd be allowed to build 4 units of housing. If this is a low density area, chances are that it doesn't have a lot of development around it. So when you're putting 8 units per acre, we're talking about problems concerning access, drainage, surface flow of water, sewage, water, power, safety requirements, police and fire department. Where do they come from? If you're putting this dense development in an area that's pretty low, pretty rural, where are we going to get all this access? How's the fire department going to come there? These are all things that we're not talking about in the low density housing paragraph. Okay, and then what you have to imagine here, according to this, is 80 units on a 10-acre piece. That certainly doesn't sound like low density to me. Okay, so let's go on here. Let's talk about extraordinary clustering. And it says where environmental constraints are significant. Okay, intuitively, you think if there's constraints, environmental constraints, why are we seeking a way to increase density? If you've got a 10-acre piece and 8 acres of it is unbuildable, why are we seeking a way to add more units on the 2 acres that are buildable? This is supposed to be low density housing. They go on to say that they're looking for a minimum 4 units per acre. We talked about that. But is that really low density housing anyway? 4 units per acre? That doesn't sound like low density to me. Okay, then we go on, and let's think about this some more. If we're achieving these densities that are recommended in the low density proposal here, is there any real way to achieve these things without building common wall townhouses or small apartment buildings? considering that there's these environmental restrictions that are making you clustered to start with. And I don't see any way out of it, but it seems to me that building small apartment houses on low-density land is not what I would think of as low-density development. I'm not sure who else will. Okay. So these are my questions. And the final one, of course, is what I referred to originally, is what is cluster development to provide future urbanizations opportunities where will be required where urban utilities are not readily available? Okay. I have no idea what that means. At this point, it's a rhetorical question, but somebody's going to have to answer what that means. Okay, so we've gone ahead and I've outlined my concerns about these provisions here. And my recommendations or conclusions is that, first of all, we should eliminate the 8 units per acre potential designation for anything that you call low density. I would recommend, this is based on my experience in Kitsap County, that if you want to call it low density, let's go with 1 unit per 2.5 acres maximum. Okay, the clustering idea looks to me like a way to get around density, density requirements. I would recommend that we allow clustering under the planned unit development recommendations, which are also included in that section of the planning document. The goal there would be to preserve wetlands and stream flow and runoff and absorption capacities without totally limiting the development of an area, but that each one of these planned unit developments would be issued or developed without increasing the density. In other words, if you were saying that this area, a 10-acre piece here, is 4 units per 10 acres, you could cluster the houses. You could make a planned unit development to cluster the houses and preserve the open space, but you would still have 4 units per 10 acres, not some way of getting it higher. I'd like to clarify sometime that future urbanization opportunities, and let the planned unit development section of the plan handle these density issues and help permit. So that was
very good. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Chernoff?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Doherty, you signed up again. You said you weren't going to speak, but he's already left. So Michael Doherty was here earlier this evening. Jacob Morningside? Mr. Morningside, come on. Thank you.
I'm Jacob Morningside, 1624 11th Avenue Southwest. And I just wanted to reinforce the people from my side that already commented on the Gator issue. And from firsthand, I wanted to tell you that just by the grace of God, I was in the right place at the right time to save a child who almost was hit by a vehicle on Decatur right across as she exited Decatur Woods Park. It's an accident waiting to happen. If we increase the traffic just on that thoroughfare alone to the level that would sustain people coming off the 101, we're just going to have children and pets, and it's going to be an incredible risk. It turns into a thoroughfare sometimes the way it is already. The roundabouts, or excuse me, they call them roundabouts, the traffic calming devices are a joke. I've seen a car that has gone through there that literally wound up taking that roundabout on 2 wheels. for trouble if we open that up. It will decimate that Southwest Neighborhood Association, that neighborhood. I live on 11th Avenue, and what is going to happen is that the people who are going to be taking that road are going to, because the Decatur ends in a T at 9th Avenue, that traffic is going to start to back up, and people are going to be using 12th, 11th, and 10th Avenues to get around that, to get downtown, or to get to the north side. And there are a lot of children, pets, walking. It's amazing the amount of activity that goes on in those streets, and it's just going to turn it into a hazard. So please consider that when you weigh into what should and should not be in that comprehensive plan. I really feel that Steve Hall and the people at City Hall and the staff are not listening. They really don't get it. It took my wife and I 6 years to get a stretch of sidewalk put in to keep people from getting stuck in wheelchairs and having to cross the street. It's amazing what goes on in that neighborhood. It's a beautiful place to live. So please consider all of this before you develop the final draft and what should and should not go into that comprehensive plan regarding Decatur and 16. I also wanted to just make a brief comment that I think I've heard a couple of visionary people here tonight, the gentleman who talked about the port and the export of logs. This is available to the people of this town if we get out of the logging mentality and exporting the business around and the cost that it really is to the city and the people. The second, of course, is T.J. Johnson, one of my heroes since I moved to this town. A man of great vision and knowledge and compassion. And what he has to say about the sustainability of food and so on is a vital way to go. I live on a 30-foot lot, and my wife and I probably produce about 70% of what we take into our bodies. We are strict vegans, but even so, we are able to do that on a 30-foot lot and make it beautiful as well. I think that every part that is out there for the people, including Decatur Woods Park, you can plant potatoes, you can plant onions, you can plant a lot of things that are edible in a park area of that size that will really go a long way. We have a number of parks throughout this city, and we have land that is not being used for those resources that would support the food bank and many other avenues of feeding the people of the city and county. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Before you go, Mr. Morningside, commissioners, any comments? Mr. Morningside? Commissioner Parker?
The same question that I've asked proactively to Mr. Chernoff. Will you be submitting your comments in writing?
Yes, I do.
No, this is my opinion, because when I heard your first comments that this was not to be discussing the comprehensive plan to start. I think you mentioned that was.
No, I refer to the Shoreline Master Program, but Commissioner Parker's right. If there's anything that, and again, if you don't want to rewrite those, just a Xerox copy or something like that. But it's
I
important for us.
submitted our comments regarding the Decatur through the, it's probably one that says wake up and smell the coffee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morningside. Next person I have is Roger Colson. Mr. Colson.
And the process that was used was they gave us all down tables. They had a staff facilitator, and we all talked. And at the end of that period of time, the staff facilitator said, now we have to report for the work process. And who wants to do it? And it turns out the person who did it, our table at least, was the most vehement person. There was no balancing out of opinions. And that's affected my opinion of the process forever. But I wonder how the staff was able to glean any consensus or thought over that process. I'm not saying that it was something couldn't be found in what you're working with someone. But well, how is the balancing? How is the leveling out? Is kind of taking all this stuff and saying everything is equally important. And so I have a real suspicion about this entire process. The same process we use is made by City Manager Steve Hall. We had a little dust up on the west side of the Parkfield Playfield. And at that time, they did the same thing. We put bats on 4 sides of the wall and had people go around them. I never saw a work product that came out of that. I'm not saying it wasn't one, but I never saw it. And the same thing occurred with the Sustainability Conference for Thursday Regional Planning. And just for accumulation, I've included copies of an article by Jim Lazar, who attended that conference. And once again, it was not an even playing field. That's a general comment. Going to 2 issues of substance. The first deals with high-density urban corridors. Now, I used to work around the transportation field, and we used to refer to this as sort of a strip development concept. Well, admittedly, this is broad as strip development, but it's still a strip development. But my real objection to it is not the concept, but in the here with such a meat-ass approach. It makes it seem as if everything's going to be a half-mile wide full of park houses. I doubt if that's the intention. But I'm concerned that the one speaker sort of addressed it. It may startle people and cause them to start selling their houses and moving out. I myself do not want to see that because, well, just take the Governor Stevens area. Those are multiple homes in there. And they add value and are part of what makes this community worth living in. I don't want to see them suddenly panicking and leaving long before there's anything to be replaced. And I don't want to see the entire corridor of Capitol Boulevard, minus the South Capitol neighborhood, suddenly become apartments, complex, half a mile wide. Just for comparison, I drove from Capitol Boulevard to where I own some property on Jefferson. That distance is just a little over a quarter of a mile. So you take a half-mile swath, you're destroying the city. You have to refine that concept before it should even stay in the plan. That's my opinion. We should recognize we already have the areas planned for intensive residential development. That's downtown. The problem with that is we have pollution downtown. And so if you allow developers to go out a quarter mile on each side of the major arterials, they're going to go there to avoid the cost of cleanup. And you're going to self-destruct by taking away any incentive for developers to work downtown. Another approach is to look at this approach to zoning. We tend to draw lines on flat maps. And we don't look at the carrying capacity of the area. To illustrate my point, I watched the attorney on TV talking about the proposed 3rd stadium in the Seoul district in Seattle. There she was contending that because it's zoned to allow stadiums, there's a no limitation on the amount of stadiums they can put in that area. But the surrounding infrastructure cannot handle it. The highway system will clog. And we need to start looking at that concept of carrying capacity of the area when we start talking about zones. My second substantive comment relates to earthquake-induced liquefaction. Now, this is something that people are avoiding like a purple plague. But the fact is, by the way, the first meeting I attended for the Shoreline Management Program Subcommittee was in February 2010. That's exactly the same time that we had the earthquake in Chile. And if you've ever seen the TV footage, those buildings that went down didn't collapse. They went over. The same thing in Japan. We simply are not at the point with our foundation technology that we can assure people they're not going to go over. I look at the proposals for development on the port peninsula. It's clear as the day that's all. First of all, I don't care if the won't get wet if the things sink. But I am concerned if any residential development or any high-rise or medium-high-rise hotels and hotels are built there. People are sleeping. That is a high-risk area. And we talked to State of the County, used to dump garbage in there. Now some major buildings are. I think you have to at least begin the process by categorizing the various risk levels of where we have all the fill and filling in the city. And I suggest you start by looking at what the county's just done with a high-risk definition of fill and stream beds and so on. Now, they haven't finished it, but I looked at it enough to see that they have started to think about it. Finally, this document has inherent contradictions. It's a big job. I think the planning commission could urge city council to establish a process for identifying and resolving these contradictions. And it may be more feasible now, since someone said it does not have to be totally done until 2016. They get the substance, but still keep cleaning it up, because there's a lot to clean up. And finally, there's a need to develop an index for the comprehensive plan. I couldn't find one day on the copy I was looking at off the internet. Maybe the document's not intended for the public, but until there is a meaningful index, so people can find where different subjects tie together, they're not going to understand this product, no matter how hard you try. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Polson. Any questions, commissioners, for Mr. Polson? Commissioner Horn.
Do you have some examples of the inherent contradictions that you mentioned that we could look at?
Well, the land use and transportation, that's where it started. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have a panel of three. So Patrick, Sophie, and Maxine Pritchard. For the record, they were here. Egan Badler, and I apologize. Is it Egan or Evan or? Go ahead.
I repeat my name, Egan Badler, and I guess for the past 10 years I live on 1914 Berry Street. It was only a couple hours ago I returned from my errands in town on my bicycle. And of course I met Paul, my good friend and neighbor. He's right over there, one of your committee members. I could hardly recognize him. He usually wears a cap and a hoodie, and I had no idea his hair was as badly as it is. I think he asked me to come for no other purpose but just for the entertainment. But we had a discussion about this and this and that. I don't quite remember what it was, but he highly encouraged me to come and show myself tonight and present, I guess, the little discussion that we've had. I guess I did some grumbling about my bicycle experience coming in through town, a few other things, but something that came up, what I worked on earlier. I have worked in Germany. I'm an immigrant, of course, I can't disguise that. I worked in Germany in a small little town of Landshut, and I had my experience. I get to know the town quite well. I've been here, of course, now a resident here in the US, but I've made very frequent visits back. I have listened to some of the concerns and some of the problems here and some of the recommendations. I right away I can't help, but see, what has that little town of Landshut done about some of these problems that we have been discussing here. And years ago, I thought it would be just so awfully very nice, we could have an exchange of a committee, city council, some board, or anything at all that has an agenda that will approach that little town of Landshut and have them prepare a presentation or a response to whatever agenda that we might have. And we get to see what they have done over there. I think we can get our surprises. We might like some of them. We might want to incorporate some of them. I'd like to point out they're not any smarter than we are. They have been confronted with some of the problems that we are being confronted with here now. They have been confronted with that a long time ago, and they were forced to react on it. And I think it would be something that we can take advantage of. The situation is quite different in Germany, in Europe. The population density is 7 times higher than ours. They have no means of sprawling as we do here over vast areas here. They live on top of each other more. If they would have 2 cars per family, they would have absolutely no space to grow their potatoes anymore. So that forces them into a totally different situation. And I think we are approaching situations here to some extent to population density, too many cars and everything else. I think one comment I made to Paul is that, in center of cities in Germany, you will see children playing on a main street. You will see children bicycling on a tricycle on Main Street. The inner city belongs to the pedestrians. Is it a good idea? I don't know. Is it something we can apply here? I don't really know. It would be interesting to follow up. It was about 8 years ago that I approached a city council, and right now I cannot remember the names, proposed an exchange. I've also talked to the Stadtrat, is what they call it in Germany, which is the city council there. If they would be interested, there was a great interest there to come in for an exchange, to present an agenda to our people here, something that they would like to see how we have handled it. Hopefully we can find an agenda that we present to the city in Landshut. Landshut is, by the way, about 40 kilometers northeast of Munich. It would be interesting. We might be able to come up with some sort of answers. Many of the things in reference to food, in reference to congestion, and everything else, in reference to buses, to bus our students to school, many of these things, it would be just interesting to see what they have done and see if that is something that we might want to consider, and not take it very seriously. If nothing else, it would be a very nice time off. And oh, by the way, I would easily avail myself to be your tour guide. And a week of it, I think, would be quite nice. I think that's all I have to say. I have nothing to submit on paper. Like I say, it was just an hour ago. And he's the one that put me up to it. So you have to talk to him, if you have any complaints about the time that I took 4 minutes and something. Thank you much.
I'm glad you came, Mr. Badler. Any questions? And Paul, you can wear your hat at the next meeting. Any questions for Mr. Badler? Could you spell the name Landshut? Could you spell that out for me?
Yes. You would pronounce it Landshut, and it is Landshut. The other thing that is also very interesting that I have proposed to Paul is to go on Google Map and simply open up Google Map and look at the inner city there. You will find no traffic. You will find people crisscrossing. You will find big areas. Landshut is built, the streets are laid out around 1500. We're talking about Old Town here from 1970. Their Old Town starts at 1500 actually. You look at their houses and you will just shake unbelievable how they live over here because the houses are leaning in all different directions. They're 500 years old. The inner city has big, wide open streets. I guess there are around 1,500 who would have piglets and everything else, crisscrossing those streets. Today you have, on a nice summer day, you have hundreds of people sitting in the middle of town. Tables and the surrounding restaurants are serving foods. The children are on a bicycle and playing in the middle of town. And it's not just on one street, it is a section of the middle of town. You go to Munich, look it up on a Google map. The center of town is the Marienplatz. It is immense, a huge area crisscrossing by people. I lived there, I worked there in the 60s actually, and at that time it was traffic that was passing right through the middle of town. Traffic. It was totally destroyed through the Second World War. I thought now they would totally rebuild that city and make it up to date. Wide streets for all the traffic and everything. They didn't. They built them up exactly the same way it was. What they have done is they have taken the traffic off the streets. Where I would cross Marienplatz, lots of traffic. There are nothing but people now. Dogs running loose and God, unbelievable musicians, everything. The other thing that you see now is in Munich, you have stairways that are going underground. We're talking about an underground transportation system that did not exist in 1964. It developed in 64. It is a vast system that they have developed. I also have to tell you, they are forced into it. It is not anything we should consider here. They were forced into it. The population density 7 times higher than ours is here is something tough to deal with. So, subway system that would take you anywhere and everywhere in the city. When they were finished with that, when they dug below that subway system, they call it the S-Bahn, and now all of a sudden you would go into the center of town, go down and catch the S-Bahn, and you go into the airport 25 miles away from the city to the airport, and where you end up exactly below the central airport terminal. So it's an exciting experience. I think the council, anybody should take advantage of it, and I would gladly be the tour guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. The next person I have is Lauren Donner, or Danner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the Commission, my name is Lauren Danner. I've lived in Olympia for 16 years, the past 8 at 617 Carline Avenue Southeast. I served 2 terms on the Olympia Heritage Commission from 2000 to 2005, and have significant professional experience in local history and historic preservation, including as former director of the State Capitol Museum. I'm a small business owner and historian, and I serve as vice president of the Carline North Neighborhood Association. So I bet you're all really puzzled why I'm here. I'm actually here tonight, of course, to address the urban corridor proposal in the land use section of the draft comprehensive plan, and to urge the Planning Commission to maintain the current zone density of 4 to 7 housing units per acre in the area proposed for urban corridor designation along Capitol Boulevard from the Alki Bridge to the 10 North boundary. I'm opposed to changing the density in this area for several reasons, all of which will be covered in my written comments that I will submit by the end of the week. Tonight, I want to just focus on one concern in particular, that of historic significance, and offer some historical context. The neighborhoods in question, which include Carline North, Governor Stevens, and Wildwood, as well as the areas not covered by formal neighborhood associations, are some of the most historic in the city. In the late 1890s, residents rode streetcars to the original Thurston County Fairgrounds, located at about the Sunset Office Building site on Capitol Boulevard, to watch horse racing and baseball games. By the end of the 19th century, a velodrome drew crowds fascinated by bicycle racing, In the first years of the 20th century, local booster and real estate developer Fred Carline replaced the bike racing track with a horse racing track. In 1913, he began platting the area for single-family homes, building his own on what is now the Sunset Lake campus. And those of us who live in the neighborhood often dig up pieces of the horse racing track or the bike racing track, horseshoes, that kind of thing. In 1915, Hazard Stevens, son of the first territorial governor and himself the first Euro-American to sign the Mount Rainier, built a dairy farm on land that now houses Olympia High School. And the entrance to the farm was the current intersection of Carline Avenue and Capitol. So I have a great old picture which is this old arch that says Cloverfield Farm. It's driveway. The Cloverfield Farmhouse still stands and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. By the 1940s, Fred Carline, J.T. Otis, and a few other developers had platted much of the area stretching east from Capitol Boulevard for single-family residential housing. My own house dates from 1924 and is part of the original Carline Fairgrounds plat. The majority of the houses in the area were built between 1920 and 1950. They tend to be architecturally modest, not formal design or high design, and include a good sampling of Tumwater Valley lumber kit homes as well. Most salient to the current discussion is that these homes were specifically and purposefully designed to be affordable for mid-level state workers. Not to put too fine a point on it, but this area was built to house government workers, and 70 years later, it still does. In the Carline North neighborhood alone, there are more than 400 houses, 300 in Olympia and about 125 in Tumwater. Along with Governor Stevens and Wildwood, as well as the surrounding areas, this represents a significant number of homes in an affordable neighborhood that continues to attract middle-class residents. By my count, there are 49 properties in this region on the historic property inventory, which was last done in the 80s, I think, and or on the local, state, or national register, historic register in the area. Most of these fall within the proposed quarter-mile urban corridor boundary. Further, 1/10 of Olympia's National Historic Register places are in this area. Last year's historic home tour, if any of you went, was also in this neighborhood. Very attractive, over 1,000 people. The urban corridor proposal conflicts with the city's existing historic preservation goals. The historic preservation chapter in the comprehensive plan requires that the city safeguard and promote sites, buildings, districts, structures, and objects which reflect significant elements of the city's history, and establish zoning that is compatible with and conducive to continued preservation of historic neighborhoods and properties. The entire area is called out as one of 5 selected historic neighborhoods in the Historic Preservation Assessment and Action Plan. In fact, the rich history of the area is a key element that attracts residents. Lots are small, houses are generally modest, and virtually every home is at least 60 years old. Many are more than 80, including mine. Adding new development and or tearing out existing homes runs counter to historic preservation tenets and would have a negative impact on one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. You've heard residents of this area tell you that the friendly, accessible, and historic character of the neighborhood is what drew them here. It's certainly true for my family. We lived for more than 8 months for a house with walkable and bikeable streets, sidewalks, families with kids, and a good school, and we found our cottage and can't really imagine living anywhere else. In sum, this is a family-friendly neighborhood that is architecturally cohesive and historically significant. The urban corridor proposal in the draft comprehensive plan disregards that. To plan for high-density development along these homes undermines the character of the neighborhood.
Thank you, Ms. Danner. Any questions, Commissioner, for Ms. Danner? Commissioner Parker?
I have a particular interest in the kit houses, and there are 2 things. By the houses on Capitol Way, near the Safeway store, that's Tumwater, is that correct?
Yeah, those are Tumwater Valley lumber. Those are a series of model houses.
And are kit houses by definition in the historic designation? I mean, do they have status? Do any of them?
Yes, in the neighborhood in my neighborhood, if you turn on Carline from Capitol, the first 4 homes on the south side are, that face Carline are Tumwater Valley lumber kit homes, and one of those is a registered designated property. But there are streets of Tumwater Valley lumber kit home model homes throughout the entire city. There's on the west side, in our neighborhood, I'm pretty sure my house is a kit house. I just haven't gotten up on the roof to look at see if the beams are numbered. And it's expanded several times, so you can sort of spot them after a while. And there's one down Warren Street that is definitely a kit house. It's in the Tumwater Park.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Martin?
Yeah,
I had a question about, you said there are 5 historic neighborhoods. Is that, you're going to be submitting comments? Could you possibly sort of tell us what those are?
well, these are quote, selected historic neighborhoods called out by the city in its own historic preservation action plan. And the southeast neighborhood, which encompasses Carline North, Wildwood, Governor Stevens, all of this area is one of those 5 neighborhoods. I'm pretty sure the others would be South Capitol, the West Side, Bigelow area, and Northeast, and maybe downtown. But I certainly include that, listen out.
Or maybe the list to the plan. It's the historic, could you tell me the name again?
Sure. Historic Preservation Assessment and Action Plan.
Thank you.
See no other questions. Thank you for being patient this evening. We've got 4 other folks, if you can hang on here. It's just coming up on 9 o'clock. Tom Zavrandes.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share my family's concerns about Olympia Comprehensive Plan. My name is Tom Zavrandes. I'm here in regard to property my family owns at 612 West 5th Avenue. From what we understand, the Planning Commission changed the comprehensive plan, and we're not clear on what these changes mean to our family or to the property. The language in the comprehensive plan talks about creating unobstructed views of the water, mountains, lake, etc. from different viewpoints all over the city, but this does not appear to be defined. This is a big and ambiguous change, and there's no indication of the impact that this will have on property owners and business owners who are the source of the city's tax base. Proper disclosure is the city's responsibility. The process of the comprehensive plan and the shoreline master program is confusing, to say the least. It is a complex and controversial plan, and communication to the community needs to be improved. My family had only heard these changes 10 days ago and are now scrambling to be proactive in the process. However, this is difficult because of the lack of the notification and the sheer complexity of the plan. It appears there's a conflict in what the comprehensive plan says and what the shoreline master plan states, and will render many properties to be non-conforming with the codes. This could result in the inability to refinance, obtain financing, sell, make significant changes or improvements, etc. It devalues our investment and the investments of many other stakeholders. Unless the city is prepared to purchase our properties at market value, then in effect, what this plan does is robs us of our hard-earned investments. Properties in the downtown area, including ours, have been zoned commercial for years, and many retirement plans and financial commitments have been made based on the zoning the city put on these properties years ago. Now, from what we understand, this is all to change, making the properties useless for their current and legal purpose and creating financial hardships for the property owners. Owners that have been members of the Olympia community for generations. We also think it is important that the city disclose our position on the estuary. This is necessary for the public to have discussion of the impacts that may result from the city's decision. On Monday night, Mike McCormick mentioned that the legislature extended the due date for these plans to 2016. I asked that the city slow down and communicate to stakeholders that have the potential for huge economic loss. If the city is unwilling to slow the process down and property owners are unable to properly learn about the complexity of the issue and how it affects them and what their options are, then has the city considered how they're going to financially compensate the owners that are going to lose their rights to the property ownership? And where would the city get the money for this compensation when in doing so, they're reducing the tax base from which the city operates? Finally, I once again asked the Planning Commission and the City Council to contact all the property owners that will be affected by this comprehensive plan, as well as the SMP. We implore you to boldly and honestly spell out the changes and their subsequent short and long-term impacts to those of us impacted by the decisions, rather than expect us all who are affected to wade through 300 plus pages to find the answers. Give us time to review the changes and hear from the city how these changes will affect us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from Mr. Zverides? Commissioner Levine.
You mentioned the city position on the estuary. Could you be more specific about which estuary?
The capital area. Thank you. I'm sorry?
Go ahead and repeat your answers, please.
It's the capital lake.
Any other questions? Thank you, and again, if there's something for you to submit to the record, that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks for reminding that.
Thank you. Next on the list is Gus Gietlein.
Gus Gietlein, and I live at 3222 Williams Road, southeast of Olympia. I want to begin by apologizing for not having really adequate time to properly prepare for this, so my notes are going to be a little rough and random, and my thoughts as well. So bear with me, please. Also, I would like to, maybe this isn't the proper point in time or whatever, but I would like to suggest that those folks that are concerned about the schedule for this should talk to the City Council. The City Council is driving the schedule for Planning Commission's review of the comp plan. So comments in that particular area are a little misdirected. Anyway, your comp plan is basically, it's a philosophical document. It is the expression of the collective will of the city as to the shape and direction we want for our city to move into the future, what we want to preserve and protect, and the changes that we want to promote. From my personal perspective, I appreciate the holistic, comprehensive approach, the respect and appreciation for the manner in which so many issues are interconnected, and the work that has been done to reduce the number of times certain sections get repeated in different manners with different implications and meanings. Making this a more coherent and comprehensive, cohesive statement of our collective vision. I'm encouraged, for instance, by the recognition of the importance of a healthy tree canopy for its contribution to stormwater mitigation, clean air, clean water, and mitigation of heat island effect. I am somewhat concerned by the unsupported assumption that jobs are keeping pace with housing. The fact is, they're not, and have not for many years. I attended a TCRP open house a number of years ago and was struck by what was called out-of-county commuterism, or the percentage of wage earners that have to drive out of the area in order to work and support their families and mortgages. And my numbers are a little rough because I'm going strictly by memory, but I believe in the 1960s and 70s, the percentage of wage earners that had to leave the county was roughly 2 to 3%. In the early 2000s, it was around 8% and was projected at that time to proceeding up to somewhere between 12 and 14% by 2025. 12% is roughly 1 out of every 8 wage earners having to commute out of the county in order to support themselves. And your average out-of-county work centers are, the close ones are Tacoma and Centralia. That's roughly 300 miles a week or 15,000 miles a year per wage earner. Other out-of-county destinations would be King County, resulting in 500 to 600 miles a week or 25 to 30,000 annual commuter miles. And you've got destinations that are even farther, like Everett or Portland. Anyway, one of the many consequences of all of this added commutership miles is that greenhouse gases become acidic rain, which in turn changes the pH of the oceans. Locally, ocean acidification has reached a point where local shellfish fry are no longer viable. The acidic ocean eats away their shells faster than they can grow them. And this is threatening a $250 million a year industry, not to mention something more fundamental, and that's a source of food. We've also heard quite a bit in the last few days about urban corridors, one in particular, that has, as I understand, that destination has actually been on the books for a number of times. That's not, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not really a change. The Capital Way urban corridor was actually in the previous comp plan and maybe even in comp plan sometime before that. There's also the adjacent uplands to Ken Lake, which maybe ought to be designated as something similar to a critical area for a number of reasons. And then there's also a proposed apartment project